Dust coated the roof of her mouth, tasting faintly of pulverized concrete and copper. For 3 days they had hunted a phantom across the ridgeline, burning their retinas through scopes and binos. They were looking too far. The killer wasn't on the horizon. He was sharing their water. Heat radiated off the shattered asphalt in visible, shimmering waves, turning the ruined cityscape below into a blurred mirage. Clyde Moore pressed her cheek against the adjustable stock of her MK-13 sniper rifle, the composite material warm and gritty against her skin. A bead of sweat detached from her eyebrow, stinging her left eye, but she didn't blink. Blinking meant missing a flicker of movement. Blinking meant giving the ghost a fraction of a second to relocate. Her legs were completely numb from the knees down. She had been lying in the prone position on the 4th floor of a gutted municipal building for 11 hours, surrounded by peeling lead paint and the sour ammonia reek of their own urine bottles tucked into the corner. Her plate carrier pressed heavily against her spine, the ceramic plates trapping the stifling 100-degree heat against her torso. This was the reality of the trident she wore, not the glamorous, door-kicking heroics sold in recruitment videos, but an endurance contest against chafing, dehydration, and mind-numbing boredom. Still nothing on the western ridge, Dario murmured from her right. Dario Albright was her spotter. He was a lanky, quiet operator from Montana who always smelled faintly of spearmint chewing gum and old canvas. Right now, his eye was pressed to the spotting scope, scanning the craggy hills that bordered the city. "Mirage is getting worse," Clyde whispered back, her voice raspy. She swallowed, trying to summon some saliva. "Wind is holding steady at 5 knots, cross value." "Copy that." They were hunting a myth. Command called him the Ghost Sniper. Over the past 72 hours, 4 private military contractors and 2 high-ranking local informants had been dropped with single, catastrophic headshots. The ballistics were absurd. The trajectory models suggested shots taken from excess of 1,200 yards, factoring in crosswinds that whipped through the valley like a blender. Whoever was pulling the trigger wasn't just good, they were a savant. And they were keeping an entire SEAL platoon pinned in a grid square of bombed-out apartment blocks, waiting for the extraction convoy that was already 6 hours late. Clyde shifted her weight, ignoring the sharp protest of a cramped muscle in her hip. Being one of the few women to earn the trident meant she was perpetually under an invisible microscope, but out here in the dust, the rifle didn't care about gender politics. Gravity, drag, and wind shear were the only equalizers. She was tired, bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that settled into the marrow and made your thoughts sluggish. Down the crumbling hallway, the low murmur of Miller Hayes, their squad leader, broke the silence. He was arguing on the encrypted SAT radio. Hayes was a bulldog of a man, built like a fire hydrant, currently stressing over the VIP they were babysitting on the ground floor. The VIP was a local warlord turned politician named Tariq, a man with too much cologne and hands that shook when the mortars fell. Command needed Tariq alive to sign a treaty. The Ghost Sniper apparently wanted him dead. "Convoy is 10 mics out," Hayes said, stepping into the doorway of their hide. He kept low, staying out of the fatal funnel of the window. "They're going to pop smoke, roll the armored SUVs to the courtyard entrance, and we load Tariq. Moore, Albright, you have overwatch. The second that package is in the open, the Ghost is going to take his shot. You find the muzzle flash and you end it." "Roger that," Clyde said. She didn't look back at him. Her crosshairs swept slowly across the rocky outcroppings of the horizon. "Hey, Moore," Hayes added, his voice dropping a register, losing the commander's edge for a brief second. "Don't get tunnel vision. If he's as good as they say, he might not be on the ridge. Watch the intermediate structures." "I'm sweeping from 400 to 1,500 yards," Clyde replied. "If he breathes, I'll see the dust." Hayes grunted and retreated back down the hall to coordinate the ground element. Clyde exhaled a long, slow breath. She inhaled the smell of decaying plaster and cordite. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. "You think he's out there?" Dario asked softly, shifting slightly behind his scope. "He's out there," Clyde said. "Sniper like this. He's patient. He's got a hide. He's got enfilade on the courtyard. He's just waiting for the bait." "Maybe he's not a local," Dario said. His voice sounded strange, flat, devoid of the usual pre-action tension. "Shots at 1,200 yards, sub-MOA accuracy? That's Western training. Could be a merc." "Doesn't matter who wrote his paycheck," Clyde muttered, dialing her elevation knob a fraction of an inch to adjust for the rising temperature. A 175, grain hollow point, is going to introduce him to God all the same. She heard Dario shift again, the faint, metallic snick of a rifle bolt being seated. Thought you were on the glass, Dario, she noted, her eye never leaving her own scope. I am, he replied smoothly. Just checking my secondary. Dust is getting into everything. Clyde frowned slightly. It was a minor thing. A tiny, insignificant breach of protocol. You didn't fuck with your weapon when you were supposed to be calling wind and scanning sectors. But the heat made everyone irritable, made everyone seek the comfort of checking their gear. She let it slide. Down in the street below, the low rumble of heavy diesel engines vibrated through the concrete floors. The extraction convoy was approaching. The bait was about to be put on the hook. The armored SUVs roared into the compound, their heavy tires crushing debris into white powder. Dust billowed up, momentarily obscuring the courtyard in a thick, choking cloud. Clyde strained her eye against the scope, tracking the gaps in the dust, her finger resting lightly against the trigger guard. Wind picking up, Dario reported, his tone clinical now. 7 knots, gusting to 10, full value from the left. I feel it, Clyde whispered. Below, the tactical doors of the SUVs swung open. 4 contractors in tan plate carriers spilled out, forming a tight perimeter. They looked nervous, their carbines tracking the empty windows of the surrounding buildings. Then, Hayes emerged from the ground floor exit, practically dragging Tariq by the collar of his expensive linen suit. Packages in the open, Hayes barked over the comms in Clyde's ear. Moving to Vehicle 1. Overwatch, talk to me. Horizon is clear, Clyde said, her heart rate finally spiking, the heavy, rhythmic thud of adrenaline pushing the exhaustion away. Scanning intermediate rooftops. Nothing, Dario confirmed. Tariq stumbled, his leather dress shoes slipping on rubble. Hayes yanked him upright. They were 5 feet from the armored door. 4 feet. 3. Crack.
The sound was distinct. A sharp, supersonic whip that echoed violently through the urban canyon, followed immediately by a heavy, wet thud.
Down in the courtyard, Tariq collapsed. He didn't fall forward or backward. He simply folded like a puppet with cut strings. A mist of crimson sprayed across the white door of the SUV, stark and brilliant in the harsh sunlight. Contact! Contact! Hayes roared over the radio, diving onto Tariq's body, dragging him behind the heavy engine block of the vehicle. The contractors opened up, blind firing into the surrounding buildings, the staccato bursts of their M4S deafening. Where did it come from? Hayes screamed over the comms. More, talk to me, where's the shooter? Clyde was frozen. Her brain was processing data at light speed, but the data was violently contradicting itself. She swung her rifle down to the courtyard, catching Tariq's body in her optic. The entry wound was at the top of his shoulder, the exit through the lower back. The angle, she traced the imaginary line of trajectory upward in her mind. No. She calculated the time delay. The supersonic crack of the bullet passing overhead, followed by the acoustic boom of the muzzle blast. But there had been no delay. The crack and the boom were practically simultaneous. No, it's impossible. If the shot had come from the ridge, 1,000 yards out, there would have been a distinct lag between the bullet's impact and the sound of the gunshot reaching them. Furthermore, the angle of the wound channel on Tariq was too steep. The shooter wasn't on the horizon. The shooter wasn't even on a distant rooftop. The trajectory was a straight line from a high elevation directly above the courtyard. From their building. More, report, Hayes demanded, panic bleeding into his disciplined voice. Clyde's hands began to tremble. A cold, oily sensation coiled in her stomach, entirely at odds with the sweltering heat of the room. She slowly pulled her eye away from the scope. She turned her head. Dario was no longer looking through the spotting scope. He was positioned 3 feet back into the shadows of the room, kneeling beside a jagged hole in the eastern wall that offered a plunging, direct line of sight into the courtyard below. His customized MK-11 semi-automatic sniper rifle was pressed to his shoulder. A thin, barely visible wisp of smoke was curling lazily from the end of his suppressor. Clyde's breath caught in her throat. The smell of spearmint was suddenly overpowered by the sharp, acidic tang of freshly burnt smokeless powder. Dario, she breathed, the word barely more than a shape formed by her dry lips. He didn't startle. He didn't panic. Slowly, smoothly, Dario lowered his rifle. He turned his head to look at her, his expression utterly blank, a chilling void where her trusted teammate used to be. His eyes were flat, absorbing the light of the room without reflecting any of it back. He was a child trafficker, Clyde, Dario said, his voice entirely reasonable, almost gentle. Tariq, the PMCs last week, they were on his payroll, moving girls through the border checkpoints in UN trucks. What the fuck did you just do? Clyde whispered, her hands instinctively tightening on her own weapon, her thumb hovering over the safety. Her mind was screaming, mutiny, treason, murder. The words flashed like neon signs, but they couldn't penetrate the sheer absurdity of the moment. This was Dario. He had carried her rucksack during Hell Week when she blew out her knee. He had met her mother. I took out the trash, Dario said, reaching down to slowly unclip his radio from his vest, tossing it onto the dusty floor. He didn't raise his weapon toward her. He just sat there, in the sweltering shadows, looking profoundly tired. Command knew. They didn't care. They just wanted the signature on the treaty. I couldn't let him get in that truck more. Over Clyde's comms, Hayes was frantic. More! Albright, I need a vector. Are you blind up there? Clyde stared at Dario. She felt the sweat rolling down her ribs. She felt the grit grinding between her back teeth. Everything she believed in chain of command, loyalty, the brotherhood of the teams, was suddenly colliding with the crushing, ugly reality of the war they were actually fighting. The horizon was empty because the monster was inside the house. Give me a vector more! Hayes screamed. Where is the ghost? Clyde swallowed hard, tasting the copper, tasting the dust. She looked at the smoking barrel of Dario's rifle, and then into the desperate, convicted eyes of her friend. She pressed her transmit button. Echo Actual, this is Overwatch, Clyde managed, her voice scraping against the dry walls of her throat. The words tasted like pulverized cement and ash, negative visual on the muzzle flash. We have an acoustic anomaly. The crack bounced off the eastern tenements. We are blind. I repeat, we are blind.
Static hissed in her earpiece, punctuated by the frantic, overlapping shouts of the contractors below. Then, Miller Hayes' voice cut through, breathless and ragged. Copy, Overwatch. We are taking enfilading fire from the street level. The locals know Tariq is down, and the whole hive is waking up. We cannot hold this courtyard. Fall back to the secondary rally point. Foot mobile. Get your asses down here now. Clyde released the transmit button. Her thumb was white from the pressure. She stared at Dario. He hadn't moved. He was still kneeling by the jagged hole in the wall, the suppressed rifle resting across his thighs. He didn't offer a word of thanks for the lie she had just told. He just looked at her with those flat, dead eyes, the corners of his mouth pulled down into a tight line of exhaustion. The heat in the room suddenly felt suffocating, a physical weight pressing against her sternum. The faint ticking of his hot suppressor cooling in the stifling air was the loudest sound in the world. Get up, she whispered. Clyde. Shut the fuck up and get up, she snarled, the command tearing out of her. She scrambled backward, her stiff joints screaming as she forced herself onto her hands and knees, keeping her rifle pointed squarely at his chest. Put the weapon on the deck. Do it. Dario looked down at his rifle. He moved slowly, deliberately, detaching the magazine and letting it clatter against the dusty floorboards. He pulled the bolt back, ejecting the live round in the chamber. The brass casing spun through the air and hit the concrete with a sharp tink, rolling to a stop against the toe of Clyde's boot. He laid the empty weapon down and raised his hands, palms open, calluses stained dark with gun oil and dirt. I didn't plan for you to be here, Dario said quietly. The roar of a heavy machine gun erupted from the streets below, rattling the loose plaster from the ceiling, showering them in white flakes. I was supposed to take the shot yesterday when I was on solo rotation. Wind kept shifting. I couldn't guarantee the cold bore. You murdered a high-value asset, Clyde said, her voice shaking. The contradiction was tearing her apart. Her training demanded she zip-tie his wrists and drag him down the stairs as a prisoner. Her instincts, the visceral, ugly truth of the war they had been fighting for years, told her Tariq deserved worse than a clean bullet to the spine. You compromised the mission, Dario. You compromised me. If Hayes finds out... Hayes won't find out unless you tell him, Dario replied, slowly reaching for his assault pack. Clyde tensed, her finger tightening on her trigger. Dario froze, holding up a hand. Just getting my water more. Just water. He pulled a plastic canteen from the side pouch and took a long, slow drink. Water spilled over his chin, cutting clean tracks through the grime on his neck. He offered it to her. She ignored it. Those girls, Clyde, he murmured, wiping his mouth with the back of his tactical glove.
I found the manifest 3 days ago on a dead drop. He was trading them for artillery shells from the northern factions. 10, 12 years old. The PMCs were escorting the trucks. Command saw the same intel I did. They classified it. They decided a treaty was worth the cost of doing business. "It's not our call!" Clyde yelled, immediately wincing at her volume, glancing at the doorway. She lowered her voice to a harsh hiss. "We aren't judges, Dario!" "We pull the trigger when we are told to pull the trigger." "I know," he said. He picked up his helmet and strapped it to his chin, his face vanishing into the shadows of the Kevlar brim. "And that's why I'm dead, either way. But I can live with this." "Can you live with letting him walk away?" Before Clyde could answer, an RPG detonated against the exterior wall of their building. The shockwave hit them like a physical blow, throwing Clyde hard against the doorframe. The world dissolved into a blinding cloud of drywall dust and the acrid chemical stench of high explosives. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the chaotic gunfire below. She coughed violently, tasting copper again, scrambling to find her rifle in the thick, choking fog. A hand grabbed her plate carrier, hauling her to her feet. It was Dario. "We have to move!" he yelled over the ringing in her ears, thrusting her Mark 13 into her hands. "They're probing the perimeter. They'll be up these stairs in 5 minutes." The training took over. The intellectual debate about morality and treason vanished, replaced by the primal, immediate need to survive the next 60 seconds. Clyde checked her weapon, flipping the safety off, her eyes sweeping the dust-filled hallway. "Lead out," she coughed, nodding toward the stairwell. The descent was a claustrophobic nightmare. The stairwell was a narrow, concrete chute that trapped the blistering heat and amplified the din of the battle raging outside. Every step kicked up decades of accumulated filth rat droppings, shredded insulation, and shattered glass that crunched loudly under their boots. They moved with practiced, fluid precision, slicing the pie around every corner, their rifle barrels dancing in a deadly synchronized rhythm. Clyde took the high angles. Dario covered the blind spots below. For a surreal moment, it was as if nothing had changed. They were just two operators moving through a hostile environment, trusting their lives to the person behind them. It made the knot in Clyde's stomach twist tighter. How could she move so seamlessly with a man who had just betrayed everything they wore the trident for? They reached the second-floor landing. The heavy steel fire door had been blown off its hinges, offering a panoramic, terrifying view of the courtyard through a massive breach in the exterior wall. The situation below was catastrophic. The two armored SUVs were shredded, their tires flattened, doors pockmarked by heavy caliber rounds. The 4 contractors were dead. 2 lay sprawled in the open, torn apart by the initial machine gun burst. The other 2 were slumped against the tires, staring vacantly at the sky. Miller Hayes was pinned behind the cracked engine block of the lead vehicle. He was bleeding heavily from a shrapnel wound to his thigh, returning burst fire with his M4, but he was hopelessly outgunned. At the far end of the street, a rusted Toyota Hilux had parked perpendicularly, a massive DSHK heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. It was methodically chewing the concrete cover to dust. Swarms of local fighters were moving up the alleyways, closing the noose. "He's trapped," Clyde breathed, pressing her back against the stairwell wall, feeling the vibrations of the impacts shivering through the concrete. "We need to lay down suppressing fire and get him out." Dario was standing by the blown-out doorway, staring down at the carnage. He didn't raise his weapon. He slowly unclipped his assault pack, letting it drop to the floor with a heavy thud. He unfastened his chest rig, pulling out 3 spare magazines for his secondary rifle, laying them neatly on a concrete block. "What are you doing?" Clyde demanded, grabbing his shoulder. "Load out. We have to push." Dario turned to look at her. The dirt and sweat on his face made him look incredibly old, like a relic left out in the desert sun. "If I go down there, Clyde, they're going to debrief us," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm against the backdrop of the gunfire. "They're going to run ballistics. They're going to check my logs. They will know." "Then you face it," she barked, her grip tightening on his shoulder. "You face the court-martial. You don't abandon the squad." "I won't let them put me in Leavenworth for killing a monster," Dario replied gently, reaching up and wrapping his hand over hers, slowly removing it from his shoulder. His grip was firm, rough like sandpaper. "And I won't shoot my way through Marines or SEALs when they come to arrest me. That's a line I won't cross." Clyde stared at him, the realization dawning cold and heavy in her chest. "You're not coming." The DSK is too heavily armored for Hayes' carbine. He can't punch through the gun shield, Dario said, turning his back to her, picking up his primary sniper rifle. He knelt by the edge of the breach, resting the barrel on a piece of rebar, his eye settling behind the optic. I have the angle, I can drop the gunner, and I can keep the alleyways clear. But I need elevation, and I need to stay put. Dario, they will swarm this building, Clyde said, her voice cracking, the cynicism finally breaking, revealing the raw, terrified human beneath the armor. They will cut you to pieces. Tell Hayes the ghost went north, Dario murmured, dialing his windage knob. He didn't look at her again. The spotter was gone. Only the ghost remained. Go, Moore. You've got 10 seconds before that gunner finishes reloading. Clyde stood frozen in the stairwell. The air smelled of burnt cordite and raw sewage. She looked at the man who had saved her life in a dozen different hellholes. She looked at the traitor who had compromised her honor. She took a step back, then another. You're a stubborn son of a bitch, Albright, she whispered to the empty air. Dario didn't reply. Clyde turned and sprinted down the final flight of stairs, her boots hammering against the concrete. She hit the ground floor at a dead run, kicking open the side access door and rolling into the blinding sunlight of the courtyard. Heat washed over her like a physical wave, suffocating and heavy. She scrambled behind a ruined concrete planter, screaming into her radio. Echo Actual, this is Moore. I am on your 3 o'clock. Prepare to move on my mark. Hayes turned, his face pale beneath the grime, blood soaking the leg of his trousers. He nodded grimly, racking a fresh magazine into his weapon. Up in the ruined facade of the second floor, a sharp, suppressed thwip cut through the noise. Instantly, the deafening roar of the heavy machine gun at the end of the street abruptly ceased. Clyde peeked over the planter. The gunner in the back of the Hilux was slumped over the weapon, a massive exit wound blowing out the back of his skull. "Move!" Clyde screamed. Hayes broke from cover, limping heavily, leaning on his rifle like a crutch. Clyde laid down a blistering wall of suppressive fire with her Mark 13, switching to her secondary M4 to keep the heads of the advancing militia down. They bounded from crater to ruined vehicle, the dust choking them, the heat frying their lungs. Every time a fighter stepped into an alleyway to take a shot, another suppressed thwip echoed from the building above, and the fighter crumpled. Dario was providing a masterclass in urban overwatch. He was a machine, calculating wind, drop, and lead with terrifying mechanical precision. They reached the mouth of a narrow street that led to the secondary extraction point. Hayes collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, his eyes wide with adrenaline and pain. "Where the hell is Albright?" Hayes gasped, looking back toward the municipal building. Clyde leaned against the brickwork, her chest burning, sweat stinging her eyes. She looked back. The local fighters had realized where the sniper fire was coming from. Dozens of them were abandoning the courtyard, swarming the ground floor of the municipal building. RPGs slammed into the lower floors, sending massive plumes of gray smoke and orange flame into the sky. The heavy, unsuppressed roar of AK-47 fire began to echo from the interior stairwells. "He got separated," Clyde lied, her voice hollow, devoid of any emotion. She stared at the second-floor window. "He's gone, Miller." As if to punctuate her words, the suppressed firing from the second floor stopped. A few moments later, a massive explosion rocked the upper levels of the building, blowing out the remaining windows in a shower of glittering shards. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. It settled over Clyde like a lead blanket. The air tasted of copper and ash, coating her tongue, working its way into her lungs. "God damn it," Hayes muttered, spitting blood and dust onto the asphalt. "Come on, we have to keep moving." Clyde didn't move immediately. She kept her eyes on the smoking ruin of the second-floor window. The mirage from the heat rising off the street warped the image, making the building look like a shivering, unstable ghost in the distance. She had searched the horizon for miles, looking for a phantom. She had scanned the ridges and the rooftops, waiting for the monster to reveal himself, but the horizon had always been empty. She reached up, slowly pressing the transmit button on her chest rig one last time, listening to the dead, empty static of a severed connection. She let it go, turned her back on the smoke, and walked away into the dust. The fog of war rarely leaves clean heroes, only survivors carrying the ghosts of impossible choices. If this gritty, boots-on-the-ground descent into the moral gray zones of combat kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this story with anyone who appreciates raw, authentic military drama that pulls no punches. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another intense, character-driven battlefield narrative. What would you have done in Clyde's boots? Sound off in the comments.